Hello and welcome to Clashes of the Week here on talkRADIO TV. I'm Phil Dave. Coming up.
We're not a banana republic where the police and the military...
But hang on, but the police would simply be finding...
Why not let Mike in? Because I'm sure he's got something.
Go on then, Mike, what do you think? What's your response to James's point? I'm confused by it, but go on, Mike, what's your point?
You'd be forgiven for questioning who's presenting when Daryl Morris has a bit of a run-in with James Woodhousen. But wouldn't you know that the subjects of Partygates continue to split opinion? Also,
it does stop germs spreading.
You've got there's no scientific evidence to prove that.
It stops.
There is no scientific evidence to prove that masks stop transmission. Do you understand that? It's as simple as that. Derek, you do not have a point.
well, I suppose a few weeks off from talking about face masks was nice whilst it lasted. However, like a bad penny, back it comes, and this time it causes a bit of friction between Kevin O'Sullivan and caller Derek in Dorset. Plus...
No, that's a different case, isn't it?
No, but it's the same logic. By your own logic, someone can continue to do their job.
It's not the same.
All right, so I could go out and kick a cat or a dog.
If you went out and kicked a cat
repeatedly, then with gleeful delight whilst it's being filmed,
the video went out, then presumably you would be fined by good employers.
All that and more on Clashes of the Week. But first, one of the biggest stories to come out of this week had to be the news that Prince Andrew managed to settle his case with Virginia Giuffre. How has this been viewed across the pond, though? That's what Rob Rinder looked into on Drive Time recently. He spoke with Chandel Summer, an American attorney and conservative talk show host.
I think it's a subject of much interest in the United States just because of the titillating nature of the allegations. I believe that this settlement, which occurred 10 days before Prince Andrew's deposition was to be taken by the American attorneys, David Boyles, probably hastened settlement negotiations. However, I think the critical factor in getting this case settled was probably the fact that the plaintiff, Virginia Giuffre, was unable to produce the supposed photograph of Prince Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell at the time that this allegedly occurred. The photograph has been, of course, everywhere. You can't have missed the photograph. But when asked to produce it in the legal process through discovery, they're unable to produce it. And they say, depending on which accounts you believe, it was either given to the FBI or it was lost. That, to me, is a critical factor which would have really undermined her credibility.
Well, it may have done, Chandel Summer, and I hear you. And just for full disclosure, you may or may not know, I'm a trial lawyer as well. What I'm trying to understand, though, to use your language, is that in the absence of being able to present the original photo to demonstrate its proof, to demonstrate that it was entirely authentic, normally that would be a kind of home run for the defendant in those circumstances. And so the challenging thing is for people to understand, given that does appear to be really critical corroborating evidence on the part of Virginia Giuffre, why Prince Andrew's team would have decided to settle in any event.
Oh, come on, Rob. We know why Prince Andrew agreed to settle. We live in an accusation culture where the accusation alone is enough to damage reputations, to take down the royal family, potentially. I mean, I don't live in London, but I can say that I can't imagine this is helpful for their public relations.
But it's already, the point, Chandel, is that, I'm not going to shish kebab the royal family. The accusation was already out there. His reputation was already destroyed. 2 weeks ago, he was doing the big I am, as we say in this country. I'm going to take this to trial. Whether or not he was facing one of your greatest appellate advocates in history or not, David Boyes, the reality was that was what he was going to do. And then you have a plaintiff who couldn't submit or couldn't provide in disclosure or discovery, as you call it, critical bit of evidence, and he settles. I mean, what do you think would have happened using your best legal brain in the course of the deposition, which could have embarrassed Prince Andrew, that he took a view to pay £12 million in settlement?
Well, my guess is that this all boils down to money. That the royal family wants to avoid the publicity, so they're willing to pay what is reported to be a £12 million settlement to rid themselves of the scandal. Because obviously, the longer it goes on, the more the more traction it gets, and people start to believe it if they haven't already started to believe it. You know, Prince Andrew, I think, just because I kind of keep up with this stuff, I know he has a sordid past. He was allegedly in love with a woman who was in the soft porn industry at one point. So he's got sort of a reputation anyway. And this is damage control for the royal family. It's pure and simple. People pay settlements. Rich people pay settlements to avoid these scandals. By giving the accuser what they want.
Right. The interesting
and
thing.
She's already gotten one settlement from Jeffrey Epstein. So she got a second settlement. So
right. I hear what you say, but she's not subject to a non-disclosure agreement. And I know it varies state to state in America. There's no federal law about this. But some states do not, for example, allow non-disclosure agreements anymore. And certainly other states are thinking about changing this from a statutory point of view, where somebody's been dismissed, for example, at work because of allegations of sexual violence, right? And there's a real reason behind that. The worry that I think the royal family must have is there's no reputation saving here, because she can write her book and get her Netflix deal regardless of how much money Prince Andrew pays up, correct?
That's right. There's no non-disclosure deal. I think really where he dodged the bullet was in the UK. In that the prosecutor over there has declined to prosecute him.
Can you help us a bit? I agree with you, and sadly we don't have time. We'll talk about this all day. But you know, I had somebody on yesterday. I suspect she's a lawyer of the left. I don't know. I know things are much more politically polarized in your country, sadly, certainly than they used to be, but nevertheless, that's the reality. And she says that in terms of federal prosecution, when it comes to bringing criminal cases in America at a federal level, granted, of course, most criminal cases dealt with at a state level, that the federal investigative authorities are criminally negligent. Would you agree with her?
No. There's just no probable cause to believe that he trafficked this woman. She was 17 at the time, and where it allegedly occurred was in London. And apparently it's okay to have sex with a 17-year-old if you are from the UK. So, you know, it wasn't against the law, even if he did have sex with her. The question was whether he knowingly participated in a trafficking of the woman. And there was apparently not enough evidence where the prosecutor in the UK thought they should go forward.
Both in the UK, well, also, and they had to determine whether or not they could have reasonable prospect of success would be the test in our country by a prosecutor to determine whether or not it's in the public interest to bring a case against him. To that extent, some people would argue that, this is a criminal prosecution by other means. And to that extent, not sticking up for Prince Andrew, but that it's not kind of legally appropriate. And this is a slippery slope into pretty bad circumstances for society at large. What do you say to that, Chandel Summer?
I'm really not a proponent of this whole Me Too movement. I feel like it's a violation of due process. The idea that someone could come back 10 years after something happened and there was no immediate outcry at the time, to me is a violation of due process.
Well, maybe, but Chandel, loads of people we know. I mean, we don't have a statute of limitation in this country, and I know again it varies state to state on bringing claims for sexual violence. Right? I mean, for example, the case of Bill Cosby's victims, a number of those women who were clearly victims of appalling acts of sexual violence, right? They couldn't bring their case and were precluded from doing so because they were timed out, despite the fact that when you listen to their stories, they're undoubtedly telling the truth, and the man was convicted. There are any number of reasons why somebody might not bring a claim against a person, especially a very powerful man, no?
Well, some of those victims also testified as similar transaction witnesses. They may not have had enough evidence or a statute of limitations issue in the case where they were not able to bring charges on those cases. But again, they waited. They waited until the statute of limitations ran. That's why we have a statute of limitations. The thing about this case...
But he was a powerful man, is the point. That's the reason. You know, I see you shrugging your shoulders, right? But I mean, taking on the royal family or somebody who is effectively, I don't know, entertainment royalty as Bill Cosby was, ain't the easiest thing to do, right?
Right. No question about it, but they're also particularly vulnerable because of that. Because any accusation against them gets compounded, it gets magnified, and they have to defend themselves not only in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. So it's a very difficult position. I have nothing but sympathy for Prince Andrew, having to have been subject to this. And then the one shred of evidence that he says he doesn't remember ever meeting this woman and that he wouldn't have taken a photograph with her. And then the one piece of evidence that they have, they say it doesn't exist after all of this.
Well, I suspect that there was a great deal more of embarrassing connections, to say the very least, and certainly sufficient for a basic cross-examination by David Boyce or, frankly, me in a deposition, which would have undoubtedly revealed that the prince was spending time in a climate of young women like Virginia Giuffre. Now, asking you about that, there are people for whom, and I care about due process just as much as you do, I prosecuted and defended in cases. And I think it's very important that we understand that our systems are based upon innocence until proven guilty. That's absolutely essential. I share that concern that the public understand that, especially in the unique stigma attached around cases of sexual violence. I get all that, right? But with that throat clearing aside, I'm also painfully aware of the difficulties of what happens when women do come forward. And also this other factor, which is perhaps not necessarily unique, but something about the Prince Andrew situation where no one's feeling sorry for him, not just because of the absence of them being able to show that piece of evidence. But this other factor, here he was, a man of power, who goes and spends his time with at that time convicted sex offender and is at parties with young women. At that point, I don't know whether you're a mum of sons or have got a husband. I don't know, right? But on a basic level, that idea of walking into a party like that with women who are as young as that, there's a moment where you walk out and go, you know what? I'm not just going to use my judgment, but my sense of decency to get the hell out of here, right?
That would be great. But, since the beginning of time, you've got Henry VIII, right? He had all of these wives, all of these crazy things going on, many different scenarios where men have taken advantage of women over the years. In this day and age, in my opinion, women are responsible for their own behavior. If they're going to put themselves in a position where they are in an environment where they're going to be taken advantage of,
Shanta, a 17-year-old, buyer beware.
Where was her mother? That's what I want to know.
I'm sorry, that is an unbelievably, I don't know anything about her experience.
No, it's true.
Listen, this is not caveat. You're caveat emptor. This is not. I'm sorry. It's a buyer beware. When you're a 17-year-old, you're promised the world, you're going to get out of debt, you're going to have a glamorous life, and so on and so forth, right? And you're promised one thing, you find yourself in a situation of sexual violence. I mean, the idea that that's the fault of the 17-year-old in those circumstances, I don't for a second think that you can believe Chandel Summer.
She is an adult. She's an adult female. She's been educated in the United States. She's not from some third world country. She is able to understand that if someone is offering her this kind of an opportunity, there might be some strings attached, in my opinion. I think if any mother who has a daughter who doesn't impart that message to them growing up is really doing a disservice to their child.
Right.
And
well, we have a name for that in this. We have a
name
name for that in this country, and that's called victim blaming. And
we have that same.
Yeah, you do, and I have to say, I actually think what you're saying.
How do you know she's the victim? First of all,
let me be clear, right? A 17-year-old that finds themselves in that situation, handed around by men, in those circumstances, I don't think you need to do more than identify them as a victim in a whole series of different ways. The idea that she has, to use the language of the left in your country, or any language, that she has power or agency in those circumstances is frankly beyond capable, reasonable belief, which is why I'm not even entirely convinced that you hold that point of view at all. But maybe you do, and I'd be interested to hear more. It's certainly the other point of view. It's one that I find, I'll be clear with you, Chandel, as eloquently as you put it, deeply wrong-headed, illogical, and frankly odious. But nevertheless, we continue to chat. It's been a privilege to listen to you, albeit that you're wrong in every sense.
Now, face masks throughout this pandemic have been the butt of most frustrations, and it's amazing that even after most of the mandates have been dropped pretty much, they continue to wreak havoc. Well, Kevin O'Sullivan opened the phone lines recently, and Derek in Dorset phoned up to question our Kev as to why it was that we here at the home of common sense are so unfeeling towards the prospect of covering our faces with pieces of cloth. Please, look at this. Who'd want to cover this up?
I said to the nurse, I'm quite angry to see that there's 30-year-olds and not wearing masks. Why don't you?
Because you don't have to, Derek.
No, just listen.
No, but you don't have to wear masks anymore. There's no rules to make you wear masks.
Just listen to me, please, to finish it off. I said, why don't you? Well, we're not sure what we've got to do now. Yesterday...
It's quite simple. You don't have to wear masks. What's the difficulty with that?
Please, just listen.
No, you listen to me. It's quite simple. You don't have to wear masks anymore. What's difficult about that? What don't you understand about that?
This is a doctor's surgery, right?
Yeah, well, they don't have to demand masks either.
Last night, we had a text from the doctor's surgery saying we can't see anyone. 2 doctors have got COVID. The nurse has got COVID. The secretary has got COVID. So please don't come to the surgery. We haven't got. We don't want to spread it anymore. Now this is talk radio, and people like you, Jeremy, have been talking.
My name's Kevin.
Sorry, Kevin. I apologise. Talking down the importance of wearing masks.
It's not very important. It's not very important. You don't have to wear masks anymore. The rule's over. The regulation is over.
Listen, Jeremy, sorry.
Kevin.
Kevin, I do apologise.
That's all right, John.
That's fair enough. Why it makes me so angry, there was older people there with medical conditions wearing masks. Now, because of this...
What is your obsession with masks?
It does stop germs spreading.
You've got there's no scientific evidence to prove that.
It stops.
There is no scientific evidence to prove that masks stop transmission. Do you understand that? It's as simple as that. Derek, you do not have a point. You have no basis for your argument.
Why do all the nurses and doctors in hospitals then wear masks if there's no point in wearing them? Tell me that.
But what? Because they have decided to carry on wearing them, but they don't have to, unless, of course, you're in surgery.
You're saying they're no good.
Huh?
You're saying they're no good.
Well, they aren't any good.
Well, explain it to me why
I'm just telling you, there is no scientific evidence to prove that masks... I'm not wrong, Derek. This is a fact.
You are wrong.
No, I'm not. All right, okay. You've got this argument. Where is your scientific evidence? Who are you quoting to prove to me that masks work?
Who are you quoting to say why are they wearing them?
You've got to read up about it. Read the newspapers.
You've got a weak argument. Why?
Yours is really strong.
Hospitals wearing masks.
Derek, why do you think that the government has lifted the requirement to wear masks? Why do you think? Why do you think Boris Johnson now says no one has to wear masks?
I'll tell you why. Because we've got a weak society that hasn't got the guts to enforce law and order in this country.
No, it's not the law. It's not the law. It's not the law to wear masks. So there's no law to enforce.
They haven't got the stomach to enforce it. Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government, but it's the only one we've got. And sadly...
look, Derek, I'll tell you what, Derek, I've got to go. You carry on wearing your mask forever, as far as I'm concerned, and really enjoy it, but rest assured, it does you no good at all. That is a scientific fact.
This is Clashes of the Week here on Talk Radio TV with me, Phil Dave. Kurt Zuma has recently received far too much publicity for my liking, especially given the vile reason that he's actually made the news. However, is it unreasonable to think that he should not be allowed to play with West Ham again? This was brought up on Christo's show recently, and he spoke with broadcaster Johnny Gould. And let's just say, I don't think they quite saw eye to eye on the situation. I would say it was a bit of a catfight, but perhaps that's not appropriate.
What I'm not neutral on is Kurt Zuma, and I agree with you. It's an absolute disgrace. I won't join the echo chamber in that. What I will say, though, is that it has nothing to do with his employers, West Ham United, and it has nothing to do with his employment.
I'm sorry?
His employers have an obligation to fine him, to punish him, which they've done. The media circus have done that more than enough. He has been shamed both by his home fans and the away fans. If he plays and starts tomorrow, he will be punished again by the West Ham fans and the opposition fans as well. The RSPCA are the moral guardians for our pets, and the obligation on West Ham and Kurt Zuma is to continue with their employment and get.
So someone committing a crime, which of course he has admitted to doing so. He has admitted that it is him in the footage. He has admitted that he did that. A crime that is subject now to an investigation by the RSPCA and the French police. A crime that he has admitted to committing, again, that doesn't affect someone's employment. So you, by your logic, you could go out, commit a crime, I could go out and commit a crime, and that would not reflect badly on talkRADIO?
He hasn't been sentenced.
But he has admitted to the crime.
Admitted to the crime, and
what's the sentencing got to do with it? So if I went and beat someone up terribly and admitted to it, you would say I could stay on air until I was sentenced. That's your logic.
The football club have fined him. I'm not defending him. He's
an
idiot.
You're defending him. You're defending the right for him to keep playing and doing his job.
I'm defending the right for him in a free country to take his punishment whenever that comes, and he's had some of it pre-trial already from the fans twice. He'll have it again tomorrow, and rightly so. And he's had 2 weeks' wages, which is a substantial fine, more than you and I could ever afford, a 6-figure fine, 2 weeks' wages, which is the maximum censure a football club can do. But equally, his employment should not be affected by this unless the crime, the punishment, should we say, the trial is concluded, that there is something in his contract which says that his employment should end. But no, I don't think that people should be punished for a media echo chamber. I really don't.
So again, just by your logic, someone can commit a crime, admit to that crime, a violent crime, by the way, because being violent towards an animal is a violent crime. And by your logic, they don't bring their employer into enough disrepute until proceedings are over, and therefore they should keep their job. So I could go out, beat someone up, film it, and admit to it, but you would say that by your logic, I could continue being on air with talkRADIO until proceedings are over with the police.
No, that's a different case, isn't it? That's...
No, but it's the same logic. By your own logic, someone can continue to do their job.
It's not the same.
All right, so I could go out and kick a cat or a dog.
If you went out and kicked a cat
repeatedly, then with gleeful delight whilst it's being filmed,
the video went out, then presumably you would be fined by good employers.
But you would defend my right to stay broadcasting whilst that was all going on.
It would be extremely difficult for you and for me to host a radio show under those circumstances, given the media echo chamber. It is a slightly easier mechanic to play football as a fit player on a pitch.
Someone who is vastly higher profile than I could ever be, and ever probably hope to be.
I don't think so, actually.
I think so. I mean, he's out playing, he's having millions of people watching him.
The two incidents. If you were, I think that actually we would be suspended pending.
But you would defend me not being suspended. By your logic, you'd defend me not being suspended. You would say I shouldn't be suspended.
I would probably say the kind of the dynamics of being a radio presenter, being a TV show host, are different from that of being a Premier League footballer, because they're not exactly the same.
So what is the crime that a Premier League footballer has to commit in order and admit to in order to then be taken off the pitch by their club? Where is the line of crime for you?
A verdict, and that's up to West Ham United after the event.
The verdict. So not the admission of the guilt; it's the verdict. So, and is there any crime that you would have an exception to on that?
I'm only here to talk about the cat thing. There's no point in drawing parallels which are not equal.
I'm exploring the logic of your argument, and that's why I'm asking, how far does your argument go?
I'm keeping straight to the cat incident, and he has been...
Are you a politician?
He's already been severely punished. He's already been punished.
But I think it's a reasonable question. So if a footballer... commits a crime against an animal that they admit to, fine, they should be allowed to play. I am just asking you, which I think is a reasonable question, are there any other crimes that a footballer could commit, admit to, and still continue playing without them being taken off until a verdict comes?
Well, presumably they'd be in custody if they were more serious.
Not necessarily.
So they'd be able...
So there could be something like, drink driving. They could get into a really violent fight where they beat someone up terribly and admit to that. They could. We've seen footballers over the years.
They would be remanded on custody.
No, not necessarily. You're not remanded in custody. You're bailed quite often.
It's not a good conversation because what you're doing is drawing parallels away, and I won't be drawn into it. This is not.
But why? I mean, if your argument is so valid about this not affecting his ability to be a footballer in his job, why are you not willing to see how far you're prepared to take that argument when it comes to other crimes, or is it just the exception when it comes to crimes against animals? I'm confused.
I won't argue on that prospectus. I will argue about the cat, the punishments he's already had from the media already, from both sets of fans, both his home fans. I think it'll be very difficult for him to be a West Ham favourite again, and he may have to move club. He's already lost his sponsors. He has been punished already. There will be, the RSPC have confiscated his cats for good as well, and then there will be a criminal verdict.
So you'd have no problem with West Ham playing him tomorrow then?
And it's at that point that West Ham need to make their decision.
You'd have no problem with them playing him tomorrow then?
No.
And did you have any problem with them playing him the other night?
No.
No. But you won't talk about any other crime that is... What about any other animal then? Okay, let's stick to an animal crime. What about any other animal? I mean, if it kicked a dog, would it be different?
No.
All right, kicked another kind of pet. I mean, I don't know. Say that again?
Playing AFL.
I mean, I can't help but feel, and I say this with love, Johnny, that that you're talking out of what might come out of a cat's behind, and that's why you're not prepared to take that argument any further.
I'm just presenting a slightly different dynamic to the discussion. I know we're on air, and I know this is a crazy sort of kangaroo court place to be, but this is also the home of common sense.
Well, it is, but I don't understand why you were able to commit a violent crime, admit to that crime, and then still continue. I mean, look, if his defence was, it wasn't me, if his defence was actually, that there was something that could imply that there was a chance of his not being guilty of such a thing, then I would see your logic. But he's admitted to it. He's actually said, yes, that was me. I did it. Right. Really sorry for doing that. So why would then should you have to wait for the due process to be over for a punishment to be given to him regarding whether he plays?
Because I think it's really important to follow the course of justice.
He's admitted to it.
He's admitted to it, and he has pre-trial, pre-verdict, been punished good and proper. Right. He has had all his sponsors taken down. He's had his trousers pulled down by the West Ham fans and the away fans the other night, right? He's had his cats taken off him. He's been shamed more than, any other footballer this year so far, and I know that's a very low bar. But I think West Ham's obligation should come following verdict, how they handle it.
You have such a strong argument on that, Johnny. You won't be drawn into any other crime that you would think that logic would apply to.
No, I won't, because you cannot draw other notional crimes, which haven't been committed, by the way. Haven't been committed, Christo.
Yes. All right.
Now, a ban on fracking must stay, the Environment Minister has said. However, Backbenchers have urged him to rethink the decision in light of the current energy crisis. Ian Collins spoke about this with Matt Ridley, a former Conservative peer and author of How Innovation Works, and Bob Ward, Policy Director at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the London School of Economics. My goodness, the size of the business cards. Is it time to overturn the ban on fracking?
Lord Matt Ridley, firstly, you heard your Conservative peer and fellow noble Lord Goldsmith saying, no, this is a one-way street now, we're not turning back. What do you make of that?
Just to correct you, I'm no longer in the House of Lords, so he's no longer a colleague.
Okay.
But I think it's a huge mistake. I think the prices of gas in this country are 4 or 5 times higher than they are in the US. That's entirely because of the supply of natural gas in America, largely because of the shale gas revolution. It's not just about fracking. Fracking's been going on in this country for 40 years or more. It's an old technology, but it's doing it in a way that uses more water, less chemicals, and sand, and it's extremely safe. It started, this idea that it's something to do with Utah, you can only do it in a desolate space is a complete myth. It started in the suburbs of Fort Worth. It's been going in Pennsylvania. It's brought gas prices down. What people in the north of England particularly want, it may not be the same for, folk in London like Bob, is they want affordable gas. And I think, we've got every right to try and get this stuff out. It's very safe. It's very convenient. It's a fantastic resource, and we're just crazy to turn our back on it.
Bob Ward, that's a fairly cogent case there. What's wrong with anything that you just heard Matt Ridley say?
Well, if shale gas can be extracted safely in the UK, there are benefits to doing that, but it doesn't have public support at the moment. And I'm sure that it's very different for the people in Blackpool, where the fracking was taking place that led to the moratorium. It was analysed, and they couldn't guarantee that it wasn't going to cause earth tremors that could be damaging. That's why the moratorium is there. Sure, Matt's happy for people in Blackpool to run that risk, but it was something that the government decided couldn't go forward, and only 17% of the public support fracking in the UK at the moment. Matt has made the argument in the past that you shouldn't have onshore wind farms with people who object to them. Well, the same applies to fracking rigs. If people don't want them, then they shouldn't. And let's be clear, there's not enough shale gas in the UK to make any difference to the international price of gas, so it would make no difference to bills.
So it's not true then, Matt, that there are, decades worth of shale gas there, that even if we used it in the short term to get us through this period, that we could certainly utilise it right now, and then as we're doing that, new technology will come on board. Is that not a reasonable argument, Bob?
Are you talking to me or...
Oh, okay, well, Matt, either of you pick up on it. I would imagine that would be one of your arguments, Matt.
Sorry, I've now lost the thread there. But just to respond on what Bob said about it not being a viable resource in the UK, that's just not true. I was talking to a entrepreneur from the US who has rights to fracking sites in the UK. He says that compared with the best shales in North America, that's the Marcellus shale, and the Haynesville shale in North America, the UK resource is 6 times as rich in gas. He said it's the most fantastic gas resource, shale gas resource they've ever come across. It's spectacular. Now, Bob says it's unpopular. That's just not true. The number of people who protested this was extremely small. I went to the Blackpool site. They were all from the south. There were very few locals who were protesting it. There were not earthquakes. There were minute tremors of the kind that would happen if a lorry drove past your house. There was a grotesque exaggeration going on about the threats of this, drummed up by extremists who wanted to stop this in its tracks. So I think if we had a fair
national poll,
conversation
Matt,
about
shows
this,
17% of the public want fracking. That's the national poll.
it's not a fair poll.
It's conducted by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, commissioned of a polling company. If you want to say they're making,
I'm going to say, is that the only poll? Let me ask you though, Bob. Is your contention here that this is, it's about tremors, or is it that there are other environmental components that you're uncomfortable with in fracking?
If you can manage all of the risks, including earth tremors and including making sure you don't contaminate groundwater and other things like that, then I have no objection to fracking. But I also think you need community buy-in, right? And that's very clear. But it is clear that we do not have enough shale gas to make any difference to bills. The most recent analysis by Warwick Business School suggested that it would maybe meet about a fifth of the demand between 2030 and 2050, and would, if anything, just about make up for a decline in our North Sea gas production. So it would not end up making us less dependent on imports. It would just end up masking the reduction in demand. We're going to be reliant on imports of natural gas.
Okay.
That's why our bills are high.
So Matt, if this is about alleviating, current pressures and problems for households, then this isn't the way forward anyway, says Bob.
Well, we certainly should have got on with it years ago. It was delayed, and then the moratorium was brought in. If it had been started when it should have been in the early 2010s, we'd have got well ahead with it by now.
Would it have reduced bills now?
Don't just
Would it
shout
have
at me,
reduced
Bob.
bills
Bob,
now?
let me finish.
Matt,
Let me finish. Don't
just
just
answer
shout
the
at
question.
me.
Okay, we'll come, Bob. We'll come back to that. We'll come to that question, Bob, in a second. Do continue, Matt.
I mean, for example, some of the objections were just ridiculous. So, of course, they worried people because they were based on false talk about how bad the earth tremors could be. For example, they said they're going to put silicon dioxide down these mines. Silicon dioxide is sand, okay? It's the same stuff. You're putting it down a mile or more underground where the rocks are contaminated with petroleum products anyway. They're not exactly, as it were, pristine clean. They're full of these oil-based products. And you're putting down there a thing that's 99% water and sand. It's the idea that there's some kind of contamination happening of groundwater is just nonsense.
Will it reduce bills, Matt? That was the
yes,
question,
it will.
Bob. So would it do that instantly?
No, of course not, because it takes a while to get these things up and going.
So, Matt, there is Bob. There is the answer to your question. It will reduce bills.
It's completely wrong. There are no experts who agree with that. Look, there isn't enough shale gas to make any difference to the international.
How much is there, Bob?
Gas.
Sorry to interject. How much is there, Bob, in terms of years? How much shale gas do we have below our feet, and how long will it be going?
The most recent analysis suggests that it could meet perhaps 20% of our demand in the UK between now and 2050, right? At the moment, half of our import, that's Warwick Business School, Matt. I'm sure you've got your own figures that you can make up.
The British Geological Survey says otherwise.
Now, the British Geological Survey gave you a resource estimate, Matt. As you say, those big figures do not account for what is technically and commercially recoverable. The Warwick Business School have done all the analysis, very careful, laid it out. You can go and read it if you like, and it makes clear. So it won't make any difference, and you won't find an expert on this issue who will make that claim that British shale gas would reduce the market price of natural gas. And indeed, if we were selling British shale gas at the moment, it would be sold at the market price, not at a massive discount to British consumers.
Well, Bob was saying on Twitter, I think yesterday, that there's a global price for gas. He knows that's not true. Gas prices are 5 times as high in this country, 4 to 5 times as high as they are in the US. It's very expensive to transport it across the ocean.
The US is not the same.
Oh, gosh, he's interrupting again.
Well, look,
importing shale gas across the ocean.
What you're saying is wrong.
Okay, Bob, let Matt finish his point. Matt, do continue.
I'd finished. I'd made my point that importing shale gas across the ocean is extremely expensive. And so it adds greatly to the cost to liquefy it. So in relying on imports from America or anywhere else in the world is not as good a strategy as relying on a homegrown resource. We happen to have a very rich resource of shale gas under our feet. There are lots of different people estimating how much we could get out at any one time, but we stopped the industry from even trying to get it out, and we did so on the basis of false accusations about whether it was safe or not.
And Bob, has it become, just a final point on that, has it become this now sort of environmental football where people will plant their flag in the territory of what they see as the correct and good side of the argument because it's environmentally dangerous and we don't want to be doing that, and I'm including the Conservative government in that?
Well, it's clear that there's a lot of strong feelings and misinformation on both sides, but the idea that we would be selling shale gas at the moment from the UK at the same price as American shale gas is ridiculous.
This is Talk Radio TV's Clashes of the Week with me, Phil Dave. Still to come.
You know, there's nothing to stop you standing, Dave. You really can. And no, you can. No, you can. No, you can. No, you can. You can.
It's impossible. Listen to what you got in the
no, listen, hold on, Dave. Hold on.
I think that's Nick's way of saying put your money where your mouth is when it comes to caller Dave in Southend, who seems to think that he can do a better job than most of the MPs we've got at the moment. He's possibly right. Also,
if the insulation programs hadn't been cut 10 years ago, as they were, 90% cut, then we wouldn't be suffering as we are with these increases.
Yeah, but you
now.
can't insulate all the homes in this country. That's a part of the problem, isn't it? Because the insulation...
Well, you can, actually.
Well, no, you can't, actually, because the insulation programme was actually deemed to be partially useless. There's a lot of people's homes that have been insulated are now suffering because they weren't done properly, and they're now suffering from dampness.
Right.
Don't panic, it's not what you think. We're not looking to the daft and irrational wording of everyone's favourite energy protest group. Oh no, this time we're talking about energy prices. Not that that's much more palatable. All that and more on Clashes of the Week. But first, you know we enjoy a good old debate here at the home of common sense. Many of our programmes often host panel discussions to ensure that the most robust of discussions can take place fairly. Daryl Morris is the ringmaster for The Panel, a feature that takes place on his evening show. And this time he was joined by political commentator Mike Indian and James Woodhousen, visiting professor at London South Bank University. The subject of the police investigating the behaviour within the walls of Number 10 over the summer of 2020 seems to have caused an undercurrent of tension. Excellent.
Mike, should the Prime Minister be given a fixed penalty notice? We now know that he is personally part of the inquiries into parties in Downing Street. Were he to be given a fixed penalty notice, found to have personally breached those rules, would that be game over?
I think it would be, because for a large number of his own MPs, the rules that were in place for the last few years were hard to swallow. And the Prime Minister's staff have certainly, there's plenty of evidence to show that there was activity inside Downing Street that the police feel the need to look into. And the Prime Minister either was ignorant in presiding over this culture or he was complicit.
Well, that's really interesting you say that, right? Because you didn't say that it was morally the wrong thing for the Prime Minister to do, and therefore on principle and out of dignity and decency he should resign. You went straight to his MPs, who, you're right, I mean, there were several of them, particularly towards those Plan B restrictions just a couple of months ago, who were very critical of lockdown restrictions over the summer even, and you're saying that for those people it would be unpalatable, and ultimately they're the ones that will continue to matter.
Yes, because in between elections, it's a Conservative parliamentary party that keeps the Tory Prime Minister in office. And we've already seen a growing number of letters, perhaps as many as 40 letters, that if you read the press reports that have gone into the 1922 committee. And don't forget the dissenters around COVID regulations, the ones that were unhappiest about the rules, were those inside Boris Johnson's own parliamentary party.
But therefore, you feel, Mike, that even though he should, on principle and morally, that he perhaps wouldn't. He would leave it up to his MPs to make that call.
I think Boris Johnson would feel that having won a landslide election victory 2 years ago, that he has every right to remain in Downing Street. However, as I say, the practical mechanism for getting rid of him, realistically, is him losing the confidence of his own parliamentary body. That's what's done for every single one of his predecessors.
James?
Well, his unpopularity in the party is one thing, and we've got to be careful even there, because the right of the Conservative Party and dissenters in the past have not amounted to a line of beans, really, when push has come to shove. But for me, the important issue is, and you raised it, Mike, is, I don't like Boris. What's new? But he was elected. As far as I'm aware, the person giving out the fixed penalty notice to the popularly elected British Prime Minister is very different from that. They are...
But he was elected by the people of Uxbridge, though, wasn't he? We have a parliamentary system here in which you vote for an MP and then a parliamentary party decides who the leader's going to be, who the Prime Minister's going to be. He wasn't elected by the country, he was elected by his constituency.
Darryl, it's important to understand that the policeman who gives him this deliciously titled fixed penalty notice, which is something I thought you and I got, actually, not the Prime Minister. The policeman is a functionary responsible to the government of the day, if I'm not mistaken. And the government is popularly elected, and then we understand that the party system creates the party leader. But the fact is, democracy is the issue here, Darryl, like with most things. And you don't have to like Boris Johnson to be nervous about him getting the Donald Trump treatment, not from big tech, censorship, which is what happened to Donald Trump, very worryingly. And I don't support Donald Trump. I support democracy. Therefore, to imagine that a policeman is somehow superior...
But hang on, the policeman wouldn't be making that decision, though, would they? The policeman would... presumably, this police inquiry will sort of fairly and accurately and independently decide whether or not Boris Johnson as an individual breached those COVID regulations.
You're presuming a lot of an inquiry. Who appointed the people doing the inquiring? How are they independent? I don't like to always copy Tony Benn, but are you sure that they're inquiring?
Well, I mean, we have to
investigation.
I take the point you're making there, James. But we sort of at least a shred of us has to believe that the police force are and can be independent. And let's just for a moment, because we're dealing with real hypotheticals there, aren't we? Let's for a moment assume that it is independent, that it does independently find that Boris Johnson has broken lockdown restrictions himself and issues him a penalty notice in that process. That's not the police saying that the Prime Minister has to resign. That's then a decision for him or his party.
That's why he shouldn't resign if he's given a fixed penalty notice. Because the hand of the police and this criminal investigation is not subject in any way to the popular will.
No, but
and its independence must be questioned, Darryl, at all times.
Okay, that's fair, James. You're perfectly entitled to do that. But the police aren't deciding that he should go. The police are the police would be finding him to have broken the rules, right? Yeah. So that's it. Police find he's broken the rules. That's their job done. It's then the point that he has broken the rules then puts pressure on him to decide that is not, he can no longer govern.
You're looking at it in completely legalistic terms, Darryl, if I may be so rude, right? The point is, who's running the country, the police or the Prime Minister? You don't have to like the Prime Minister to favour the Prime Minister running the country.
But the police aren't deciding whether he should resign, they're deciding whether he's done something wrong.
Yeah, but I'm saying he shouldn't resign just because the police go around there with a ticket. Right. Okay. And because they judge him to have broken the lockdown rules. What we think of him and the lockdown rules, his double standards, his hypocrisy.
But what you're describing there, James, is that from top to bottom or otherwise, that you have no faith in the police to make an independent judgment on that, and therefore any judgment that they make.
It's not just that. I'm not cynical, right? But I remain suspicious, okay? You yourself are unable to say who is on the inquiry, how it was conducted, and so on. But I take your point. Let's agree with the police that he broke the law, he deserves a fixed penalty notice. A cop is going to go round his door, give it to him. It's all going to be hilarious and embarrassing, which is what we expect of Boris, right? The question is that a precedent that we want to set with the police and our elected leaders, elected by the device that you describe? It's a very dangerous precedent to set, Darryl. And of course, the police are not responsible for him resigning. That's a political decision for him to make. He won't make it on the grounds that I'm saying he shouldn't resign, namely that democracy is superior.
What do you mean by precedent? What precedent gets set?
Well, I don't know whether you've thought about it, but when the police assume more control over elected members of parliament than the elected members of parliament and the government, then you're making sure that the executive and also the judiciary are superior to the legislature.
But they're just judging him to have done something wrong. Whether he resigns,
Yeah,
whether he resigns is then his decision. Whether his MPs,
we, not the police, are the ultimate judge of that. It's called democracy, where actually an arm of the state is not allowed, just like that, to go round the Prime Minister's door and say, you know, well, fixed penalty's not so bad, but, you know, we're not a banana republic where the police and the military...
But hang on, but the police would simply be finding...
Why not let Mike in? Because I'm sure he's got something.
Go on then, Mike. What do you think? What's your response to James's point? I'm confused by it, but go on, Mike. What's your point?
We draw these lines again and again for when we think Boris Johnson should resign, and James is right. It's an entirely political matter. We do have a named Metropolitan Police Officer leading the inquiry. The Met have a very confused line of accountability. The Commission is responsible to both the Home Secretary and the Mayor of London, and we've seen that this week as well. Fundamentally, though, whether Boris Johnson remains as leader of the Conservative Party first and foremost is going to come down to how his party price in his considerable assets versus considerable risks. If he continues to do poorly in the polls, if Keir Starmer and Labour continue to poll strongly and have a poor performance in the May elections, that's going to weaken his position further. If there is a fixed penalty notice issued, and we have to say if at this point we do not know what the outcome of this inquiry will be, it may exonerate him entirely, and that in that case this all blows over. He may have been entirely ignorant to what happened to these gatherings. Well, we are supposing a lot of things in this as well. Then he can carry on. But Boris Johnson has time and again courted controversy as well. And his behaviour, I think, is something that we must judge here if we're going to talk about a moral dimension. The untruth that he repeated in Parliament using parliamentary privilege, which I know James will agree with me, is a very important component of our democracy, a very important tool that's available to our parliamentarians. Boris Johnson exploited that to repeat an untruth about his main political opponent that was then repeated in rather ugly scenes outside Parliament earlier this week when Keir Starmer and David Lammy were surrounded in that car.
That's too much of a stretch. You really think that a speech by Boris Johnson is intended to
James, I said that it was repeated by Boris Johnson. I didn't say that he rallied the mob. I'm just saying that he chose to repeat an untruth in Parliament where he was free from the consequences of making that decision. He used his pulpit to repeat an untruth. That's all he did. But even then, I think that as with Donald Trump or anyone else who uses any sort of platform to spread disinformation and untruths, it is thoroughly irresponsible. And also, I would dare say, very cowardly as well, because the Prime Minister, when asked if he repeated it in public, didn't say it.
It may be irresponsible, and it probably is cowardly. Would you censor it, Mike?
I wouldn't, but I'd say it's up to the individuals who hold power and responsibility to use their words carefully, because not all of us have the weight and influence that Boris Johnson does, or indeed the power that he does as well. And the fact that those scenes happened this week should be a very careful reminder that when he's cornered, Boris Johnson does tend to resort to some fairly rum tactics in order to try and get out of any form of scrutiny. That, in my opinion, is why he should resign.
Okay.
Well, that's fair enough. You know, it's a political matter, and we're allowed to comment on it, right? But you know, the long hand of the law has grown considerably with the civil service, with the criminal justice system. The numbers of police are down. I'd be a bit more interested if they stopped trying to go after people for what they think, for hate crimes and thought crimes, then, you know, they came around the elected politician. It can be an MP. The principle's the same. It's not about Boris.
Okay.
It's about whether political representatives should be treated to this kind of stuff. You know, they should be demanded to resign. And you are eloquent in that case, Mike. But that's very different from a copper coming around their door and us saying, "Oh, well, go ahead, you know, no problem."
Oh no, but James, if a copper came to knock on Boris Johnson's door, he would be holding him to account for something that he would, as the police, they would be holding him to account for a law that he'd broken.
Yes.
And then the political bit happens, right? The Tory MPs decide if they can stomach that. The electorate decide if they can stomach that. Boris Johnson himself decides if he has the authority to continue to govern under those circumstances. The police's role in that is to simply decide whether or not he's done something wrong. That's their job.
Well, you can look at it that way, but you know, how much confidence do you have in the police?
Well, I think we need to maintain at least a shred. I mean, I know for sure that the confidence has been absolutely hammered, and I hold no candle for what's happened in the last couple of years, James. But I think that we have to hold on to at least a shred of belief that they are acting on behalf of the people and are able, at least at some levels, to do that.
Well, I doubt that. You know,
Okay.
you yourself speak of a shred, and if you're hanging on a shred of the independence of the police and the judiciary to nearly arrest or whatever it is, you know, to take measures against an elected politician, I think it's a very dangerous step.
Now, on to the subject of wages for care workers, which of course has always been a bit of a sore point, not to mention the workload that they have had to endure pre-pandemic, let alone during it. Of course, it does beg the question, could Joe Public do a better job than the current clan in Westminster, who of course are responsible for paying them? Nick Dubois found out the answer to that point, arguably the hard way.
In the meantime, let's go to Dave in Southend. Dave, hello.
Carers.
Yes.
Let's swap the wages of politicians for the care home staff wages. So let's flip those wages over and let's see how the politicians would bear living on £8.91 an hour. I think that is absolutely disgusting, but it's all the fault of the population. We threw these poor workers to the wolves in the coronavirus, and no one stood up for them. Even the unions. I'm a union man of old, when there was a TGWU, etc., and not one union, except the new one, the workers' union, stood up for these people. We all stood there. You heard people saying, I don't want these people touching my relative if they're not vaccinated. Well, these are the same people that are going to get someone who's coming from overseas that you don't know what their background is and all the rest of it. Serve everyone right for allowing these poor workers to be thrown under the bus. We deserve everything we get on this subject. We should have stood by these people and said, no, 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 Boris, leave these people alone. And now we've got a care home system that is collapsing, and the public are still not doing anything about it. Disgrace on all the people in this country. We should be ashamed of ourselves for throwing these people under a bus.
Dave, it's not the pandemic that's caused this. There was strain on this system before the pandemic as well.
I know that. But the government threw these people under a bus by saying, if you don't have the vaccine, you're out of a job. They lost their jobs. But when it came to the NHS, oh, no. We can't afford to lose.
Well, look, you won't find a slither of difference between us on that one, Dave. I think when the idea was first mooted, you would have found a lot of support from across a lot of people in the country about why they think people on the front line of healthcare and social care should have been vaccinated. Where I fell out with the government was as it became with Omicron, which we all knew was a completely different kettle of fish, even before the government scientists admit it. To persist with that was a mistake. I totally agree with that. Dave, your answer, right, that you say swap politicians with care homes.
I'm of politicians and their money.
You might be. What are you going to replace, Dave? Dave, hold on, Dave. You can never accuse me of cutting you off, but I've got to get a word in every now and then. So, what are you going to replace politicians with?
Mr. Dubois, I heard the other day, I think it was last night, I'm not quite sure, I might have got the wrong night.
I appreciate you listening.
Yeah, I do listen to it, because I think you should have been voted back in, because you seem to be a genuine, good, kind man, which is unusual for a politician, I've got to say.
Well, that's kind of you.
I've got to say this, 101 Tory MPs are the ones we owe our freedom to, not Boris Johnson. He would have locked us down.
COVID recovery group.
And women, yes. Save this country, and everyone should remember those.
Yeah, I think they should. I fear they won't, by the way. But I agree. They've done a hugely important job. But yeah, go on.
The problem is these politicians don't give a monkey's rat about us. They're going to give themselves, and you know it's coming, because you know it's coming. They're going to give themselves another couple grand pay rise, and they won't give a damn. But the problem is this: you say you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. No. The trouble is, you said the other night about these politicians have been in it all and there. Most of them have got companies. Most of them have got businesses that are doing very well. And a lot of them who are career politicians, I bet one of their suits costs about a year's wages of a care home staff. I find this absolutely appalling. You give me the job of 84 grand a year and I'll do it. I ain't got a problem.
Okay, well, there's nothing to stop you standing, Dave. You really can. No, you can. No, you can. No, you can. No, you can. You can.
It's impossible. Mr. Dubois, you've got to be in the Conservative
No,
Party
listen,
or the
hold on.
Labour Party.
Hold on, Dave. Hold on. You can stand. I agree with you. Your chances of winning as an independent are very remote. But you could join. Dave, you are so vocal, right? Which is a good thing. That's not a criticism. You could go into any party and you would be able to apply to become a candidate. And I'm going to do an exercise, and I hope I remember to do this before I I'm taken off air permanently. I also think it would be a good idea to challenge your claim that all MPs have their foot in businesses and the majority of them do. Now, I agree with you, some do, right? And in some ways, if they're still carrying on that activity whilst they're in Parliament, I don't like that because I've always thought of it as a full-time job. But the reality is a lot of them will have come from businesses, as just a lot will have come from the public sector, teaching, whatever it may be, and long may that continue because we need that mix of experience. But it's not as sort of corrupt as you're suggesting. It's still one of the best systems in the world.
The trouble is, the other night, I think you've still got your political hat on. You do seem to protect the political class. You've only got to listen to the other side, what we can hear you. You're always protecting the political class all the time. The trouble is we need some rank and file people in there. We don't hardly get anyone in there that's rank and file, and that is the truth. We don't. I will do that job for 84 grand and I'd love it. And I would do my best for anyone and everyone in my constituency. But you know as well as me, sir, a normal person on the street would never be able to get into an MP's job into the Conservative Party or the Labour Party unless you're part of the clique. And you know that.
No, I tell you, Dave, let me deal with your allegation that I protect the political classes. No, let me be clear. I will always fight misinformation, right? So, for example, you said MPs will vote themselves a pay rise. Dave, I'm going to say this bluntly, and I've got a lot of respect for you, but that is so wrong and so misinformed.
I didn't say that.
You did. No, you did, Dave, you did, because I flinched when you said it.
I said, they're going to give themselves another...
They're not going to give themselves... Dave, they're not going to give themselves another pay rise. You demanded a system, the public...
That decides their pay rise. Do you honestly think that they are independent? Come on.
Dave, how do you think... Dave, no, listen, Dave, how do you think MPs have been prosecuted for fiddling their expenses since the last expenses scandal? It's because that independent body, IPSA, go after them and they end up, and some have gone to jail. It is independent. Every MP, I'm pretty sure, loathes the whole system of IPSA as they are known. They choose Dave, you've got to look. I take you at face value, and I'll only correct you on facts. Okay. Now, I have a passion for our Parliament. I believe it's still the best in the world. It has flaws. It has people in it that shouldn't be in it, and I'd love you to be in it, Dave. And do you know what? Perhaps I'll drag you down to a Conservative Party meeting and you'll just see who are members of that party. And then if the Labour Party will let me in, I'll take you into the Labour Party and you'll realise it's not a stitch-up as you think it is. I promise you that. Is that a deal? Is that a deal?
I think you should have been re-voted. I really do.
Well, that's kind of you.
Man. And there are 101 genuine people there. But the rest of them, I'm sorry, who on earth in Parliament stood up, Mr. Dubois, and said that people can live on £8.91?
I don't remember who it was. I am ashamed to say I don't.
How can you MPs, not you, but when you was an MP, how could you guys and ladies have stood there and said you can have £8.91 an hour? What a disgrace.
Okay, all right. Dave, you've made that point really well. I'm coming up to the break, Dave. I'm not censoring you, I promise you.
It's time to talk wokery. We do enjoy a bit of woke bashing here at the home of common sense, and might I suggest with very good reason. News this week came about suggesting that some schools have been instructed to drop using gendered sir or miss in the classroom in order to ensure gender neutrality. What a good job I am on air, so I don't say what I really am thinking. Anyway, this was brought up on The Late Show recently. James Whale and Ash spoke with Claire Ford an education expert and teacher.
Claire Ford, good evening to you. Welcome to the programme. Why are teachers so woke?
Hi, thank you for having me here. Well, not all teachers are woke, and those that are woke, aren't necessarily. It's a bit like jumping on the bandwagon, I think.
Exactly. Is it?
I think conscious educators are few and far between, to be honest. And I think that, it's a difficult and thorny subject, and it's a tricky one to talk about because it's a bit divisive, I guess. But I think personally, I do think that teachers need to wake up. I think parents need to wake up. I think we all do. I think that humanity is waking up, and that the pandemic has forced that upon us to an extent.
Waking up to what, do you mean?
Yeah, I was going to say that. What are we waking up to?
Just becoming aware that these old paradigms, these old patterns, these systems that we've got aren't fit for purpose.
Which systems are those?
Well, I mean, the education system, for example, has been failing children long before the pandemic in many ways. And I think that it's because of its failure to adapt. When it was created, for example, I think the Education Act in 1944 said that they wanted to train young people to be 20% clerical workers, 80% manual workers. Whereas, of course, now the workforce that young people are going into is completely different. And I truly
Are teachers too thick nowadays, Claire Ford? Are teachers a bit thick? I think I've met lots of teachers and they all seem a bit dumb and a bit dull. I mean, is it the old adage, if you can, you do, and if you can't, you teach? Do you think that's fair?
I think that's absolutely not fair at all. I think teaching
Really? Prove it to me.
I think that teaching is one of the most difficult professions, and that actually to stay in teaching is very difficult. It's so stressful. It's
Why is it stressful?
Highly
it's an easy job.
pressurised.
Why is it stressful? You very seldom get the sack. How can that be stressful?
It's a highly pressurized and often very toxic environment. And
why?
I think because of all the checks, balances, standardized testing, paperwork.
But this is all a modern system, isn't it? We need to get back to the old basics. It's all
Bring back corporal punishment. Cane the little. That's
well, no,
what we need,
the thing is, they said, you can't have exams these days. The poor kids, they can't have the pressure of exams. And gradually they've been mollycoddled. And like you say, there's also a lot of box ticking now, and teachers have got to fill in this form. And we should just get back to the basics of good teachers, getting kids.
But they're all left wing. That's the trouble. They're all bloody left wing.
Well, you can't.
Teachers should have been, should be allowed to teach. And unfortunately, the teaching aspect of teaching in schools is quite small. There's so much other rubbish that teachers have to do to.
What sort of rubbish?
Crowds out the crowds out their headspace. Well, all the meetings about the meetings.
And this is all linked with wokeness and all this. We better do this and we better do that. We better tick this box and that box.
It's not linked with wokeness.
It's all linked, isn't it?
It's not
well, you're all a bit woke, aren't you? Come on, Claire. Teachers are all a bit woke. All this, we're going to go vegetarian. That's not your decision to make about my children.
Absolutely.
Okay?
And I would never say the whole school has to be vegan. You have to be able to have a choice. People have to be able to have a choice. Families have a choice. Parents
I'm not really sure why children should have a choice at school. We never had. I had to go and have school dinners, and they were mostly shocking.
Yeah.
So
the meat, especially, was terrible.
Yeah, the meat was pretty terrible.
Worst meat,
it helps you become a man or a woman, whatever you want to be. Apparently, you can't be a man or a woman, Claire, anymore. You've got to be a thing.
You can choose how to define yourself. Is the point?
No, you can't. You're a woman.
Well, why can't
If
That's
I
how you're going to be
define
defined.
myself as that, then I am. But if I choose not to define myself as that, then that's
Why
my
would you
choice.
do that? Why would you do that?
Well, you'd be sir or madam, wouldn't you? Or miss or sir. I mean,
No, Ash, why would you, if you're a woman or a man, decide not to be a woman or a man unless you want to
you could
change your
change.
sex?
Yeah,
I can
exactly. So
understand
you
that,
might have started off a miss and then you might be a sir. But there's those are the two options, aren't there? Or are there other options now? Is that...
There are some people that do not find themselves in that one of two options. There are some.
Well, they're
people.
rare, few and far between. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Few and far between. And actually, is that something that children need to know about until they get to a sort of adult age?
It never caused problem 40 years ago, did it? Or did
No,
it?
we never had
I
any
never heard
problems.
of people who had problems with it.
And why do so many people, Claire Ford, have so many mental health issues nowadays when life is so much easier than it used to be?
Well, it's
I
more
think
complicated in some ways, isn't it?
It is more complicated in some ways. It's not that easy for young people with the rise of social media.
What do you mean it's
no,
not so?
I'm sorry,
it's not so good
rubbish.
for young people. They've got everything they want nowadays.
Absolutely not rubbish. I mean, I think that
It absolutely is rubbish.
NHS trusts have said that 60% of students under 18 have been referred to a mental health specialist, but have not received the treatment. And this is the thing that
I'm glazing over.
Even when children are
I'm
crying
glazing
out
over.
support, the support isn't there, and that's what's actually very
across the
scary.
whole of the mental
Yeah,
health.
but everybody now, when things are not going right for them, not everybody, but lots of people, when things are not, they say, oh, my mental health is now at stake. How many flipping teachers do you hear going, oh, my mental health is not... It's obviously, if you say that, you're in the wrong job.
You tell me. You know all about teaching, obviously.
I probably know more than you do about it, obviously.
Okay.
I mean, you're standing there telling me the education of our kids is really great and the teaching is really
I'm not
great
saying
at the
it's
moment.
really great. I did not say
I
it's
don't
really
see
great.
that.
It needs to be changed, is what I'm saying. It needs
change
to be
it then.
changed.
Every time
There's
somebody suggests
a lot
it,
wrong with it. I am changing it. I've created.
But what is the changes, the
academy.
big changes that need doing then?
So I've created an online academy to try in my own way to make some changes, and some of the changes that I talk about with my students. Yes, we learn the 3 R's: English, maths, reading, writing, and all of that, but we do it in a creative way. We do it in a way that is meaningful and relevant for the students. So they're not just regurgitating stuff.
Stop. Teach us to read, to write, to calculate, and then we can get on with life, okay? 100,000 children leave the education system every year unable to read and write.
Yes.
How they get through, you lot, I have no idea. But it's been the same number, roughly, since the end of the Second World War. And it seems to me...
Tragic. Absolutely tragic.
Well, never mind it's tragic. You're going on about all this and we do it this way, that way.
43%
Just teach people to read and write.
I know. They don't read adequate levels even by the end of primary school. So there's something wrong with the system. The class sizes are too big. We're not able to help the children who need support. We're not able to push the talented and gifted children so that they can reach their potential, and the ones in the middle get left behind. This is why I'm not in the education system. I've
It's
left
never
it.
been any different.
So should we have grammar schools? Is that what you're saying we should have?
I'm not saying what kind of schools we should have.
Well,
I'm
should
just
we have?
saying
Don't you
that
think we should have grammar schools?
I didn't say we should or we shouldn't have
Well,
grammar
what's your
schools.
view, though?
I think we should have lots of different kinds of schools and give parents the choice.
So we should have.
And this is what's happening with the pandemic. Parents now are empowered. They can vote with their feet. So they can choose grammar school. They could choose to go to forest school, flexi schooling, world schooling, no schooling, homeschooling. There are so many different kinds of schooling available
No wonder
now.
the world is in a mess, Claire Ford, because you give people too much choice and then they don't bother. They just go with the flow. You don't need all that airy-fairy stuff. In my opinion, what you need to do is teach children to read and write.
Like in China, they hothouse them, don't they?
Now.
They hothouse them
They
in
do.
China, and they do
that's
very well.
Scary. Well,
Yeah, very good.
It makes
they?
them do better, doesn't it? Make them,
course
aren't they
they do.
ahead of the curve when it comes
Not
to...
really. I mean, I think schools like
The
Finland.
problem
are
is
ahead
there's
of the
no
curve.
discipline in school now, is there? You don't get respect.
Well, that is
A
true.
lot of kids just ignore you because you're all a bit wishy-washy.
Spare the rod, spoil the child.
Now, on to the subject of the ongoing energy crisis as it continues to cause misery all over the place, and frankly, it looks like it's only going to get worse. Experts are now warning that surge pricing tariffs could force households to limit their use of energy. Mike Graham brought this up shortly before he went off on a very well-earned break. He spoke with Ruth London from Fuel Poverty Action.
Yes, they are making a mint. And not only the retailers, but the wholesalers are making a mint. The North Sea oil and gas companies clocking up record profits. And we say there's plenty of money around in their hands and in the hands of a lot of people who've got quite rich over the pandemic. A lot of corporations have increased their profits manyfold.
Yes.
And there's plenty of money, and it should be used to make sure that people can keep their heating on.
Well, exactly, because so far the government's measures seem to me to be pretty paltry and not really very worthwhile whatsoever. I mean, to promise people some money back off their council tax, which is only if you happen to live in 4 particular bands, and it's not really more than about 12 quid a month, to promise people a loan that they haven't asked for in October, by which time prices will have gone even higher through the roof than they are now. I mean, surely there must be something else they can do.
There is indeed. We're calling for something called Energy for All, which would be a pricing system where everybody gets enough for the basics, enough energy to heat the home, cook, keep the lights on, not be profligate with it, but just some security so that people don't actually die. Because at the moment, you know, even before the pandemic and before these price rises, about 10,000 people were dying in this country in cold homes. That's absolutely scandalous and unacceptable. We think instead of a system where you pay a standing charge, even if you've cut down your usage to nothing, you should have a system where you have the basic energy and then start paying for amounts over that. And we think that because there is so much money in the system, you know, the absolutely massive super profits that are being made now, and because there are patriotic millionaires calling for a change in the tax system where richer people would be taxed to make sure that poorer people don't go cold and hungry. You know, because of all that, we think that this is very practical and it should be done and it can be done.
Yeah. See,
we have a petition for it, actually.
OK, and you can tell us where people can sign that in a moment. But let me ask you this. My problem with taxing people more, right, is that actually you're encouraging the greed of these companies, whereas I would rather see the companies perhaps being taxed more rather than the people being taxed more to pay more money to people who have already got all the money.
We certainly are in favour of companies being taxed more, and particularly fossil fuel companies, because let's face it, the money that they keep is invested in fossil fuels, and the fossil fuels are very volatile in price, as we've seen, and they're also destroying the planet, and that has all sorts of horrendous repercussions.
Yeah, but one of the
future.
reasons, Ruth, one of the reasons that these prices are so high is because we pay a 20% a tariff on the green subsidy, and we've asked in some MPs have asked for that to be removed because it would make the bills for a start 20% cheaper. Surely that's a good idea, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's absolutely not. First of all, you know, you're throwing a lot into that 20%. Some of it is warm home discount, which actually pays for people to heat their homes when they otherwise couldn't afford to. And a lot of it goes to eco, which is insulation. And insulation is one way to make sure that our homes are warm, that people aren't dying of fuel poverty, and that we reduce carbon emissions. And this is actually a very tiny proportion. The increase now has nothing to do with the so-called green levies. The increase now has to do with the fact that the gas companies, whose costs have not gone up, have just realized that with increased demand, they can charge more, and they are taking advantage of that and charging more and leaving people cold and hungry as a result. We don't think that's acceptable. We do believe in taxing more on the companies, but we also believe that there are some individuals who are, let's face it, you know, buying yet another house in the Maldives or you know, the Caribbean, or jet setting into space, and they can afford it. And some of them are saying, we want to afford it. We would like higher taxes on us and less on poorer people who are now being asked for more through national insurance.
Yes, but that's why I don't understand why you wouldn't support my wish to reduce that 20%, because if the prices are going up, the government's getting more tax because it's 20% of a higher number. So they could, at the very least, even if you wanted to keep it in principle, reduce it to 10%. They'd probably still get the same money they were getting this time last year with 20, and at least that would help people a little bit.
The money that would be saved by taking that off would only reduce what's available for people to keep warm and insulate our homes. And insulation is absolutely vital. You know, we're heating the streets. If the insulation programs hadn't been cut, 10 years ago, as they were, 90% cut, then we wouldn't be suffering as we are with these increases
Yeah, but you
now.
can't insulate all the homes in this country. That's a part of the problem, isn't it? Because the insulation...
Well, you can, actually.
Well, no, you can't, actually, because the insulation programme was actually deemed to be partially useless, because a lot of people's homes that have been insulated are now suffering because they weren't done properly, and they're now suffering from dampness.
That is right. That is absolutely right, and it has to be done properly. It has to be done in a controlled way with trained, well-paid, well-monitored contractors, and there has to be accountability to the people whose homes are being insulated. But people are all over the country are crying out for insulation because they're suffering. They're suffering from air pollution, they're suffering from noise, and they're suffering from cold. And this is wasted money and wasted lives, really, because the work that could have been done hasn't been done.
But insulation isn't the answer, is it? Because what you're doing, again, effectively, is spending more money. Surely the only answer is to tax them.
We do believe in taxing the companies, but insulation is a big part of the answer, and switching to renewable energy is another part. But for the immediate...
But we haven't got enough renewable energy, Ruth, have we? Because every time we try to rely on renewable energy, it turns out that there isn't enough of it.
We haven't now, because there's effectively been a ban on onshore wind, and that has to change. Can I just come back to the pricing, though? Because at the moment we have an
When you say a
upside-down
ban on...
pricing
Sorry,
system.
hang on a minute. When you say there's a ban on onshore wind, what do you mean by that?
I mean that it's the processes that people have to go through to get permission to build wind farms on land are so biased that it's almost impossible to do it.
But there's loads of wind farms all over the country, though.
There are, yes, but there need to be more.
Yeah, but there's not a ban on it, is there? That's not right.
It's in effect a ban, but it's
not
actually
a ban.
a
No,
ban.
it's not a ban. Thank you.
Sorry, I really want to come back to the pricing,
Yeah, all right.
because
I
at
just
the
want to
moment
make sure we're
people
getting the
pay
facts
more.
out there to people, that's all.
Yeah, okay. People pay more for their energy if they use less. We want to turn that on its head so that the basics are covered. And the petition for that is on our website, fuelpovertyaction.org.uk. And it's been rocketing off. We've had over 200,000 signatures in just a very few days. And I think that shows that people in this country believe that we can afford enough for people not to be dying in poverty. We can afford that.
And
the
what
money is there.
And what exactly are you asking for, Ruth, in that petition?
We're asking for energy for all, for a band of energy to be free for people to cover the basics, and for that to be paid for out of windfall taxes, and into the subsidies on fossil fuels, because now they're being subsidized to a high degree.
Yes, but don't you think also that the subsidies to all of these fuel sources is essentially wrong? Because an awful lot of people are getting very wealthy as well on the renewable energy markets and the renewable energy companies, which get subsidies from government, which is effectively from taxpayers' money. And I think now that we are in this particular squeeze, there's lots of reasons, and lots of experts have told me lots of different reasons for why oil and gas prices are so high. Many of them are because we don't have any of our own anymore. We don't actually research it, and we don't go and drill for it anymore, because that was considered to be the bad way to go. So surely the best thing, if you want to reduce prices, is to take advantage of everything you can take advantage of and make it as cheap as possible.
Best thing is to take advantage of the resources that we have as an island in wind, waves, tides. We're very well resourced to have cheap energy in this country, and you just need to invest to begin with, and then it will be a great deal cheaper than it is now.
But we're told that a lot of the subsidy that we pay currently is going into that investment.
If you actually look at the figures, you'll find that a huge amount is going into subsidizing fossil fuels. The fossil fuel companies in the North Sea...
No, the Green Levy is not going into fossil fuels, is it?
No, that's true. But that is nothing compared to what's going into, for instance, decommissioning plant. Now, if you have a restaurant, you don't say, okay, you have to fund the production of the meals, but we will deduct tax for the job that you have washing up afterwards. But in the North Sea, they're saying you have to fund the drilling, but we will deduct all your costs for decommissioning the rigs afterwards. That's not right. That's a huge proportion of the cost of these enterprises, and that's being paid by the taxpayer.
Well, that's because we want them to be decommissioned properly, presumably. They don't want to just leave them sitting there, do they?
commissioned properly anyway. That should be part of the license conditions.
Well, it should be.
That doesn't mean that we have to pay for that.
Ruth, you're barking up the wrong tree here. Surely the point is, if you want to make fossil fuels outmoded and outlawed, that's one thing. But what we're trying to do here is make energy affordable for people. And the best way to do that, surely, is to take advantage of the cheapest energy.
The cheapest energy is the energy that comes for free from the sun, the wind, the tides.
Well, it doesn't come for free to us, does it? But it doesn't come for free to us, and there's not enough of it.
It needs investment. It needs proper government investment, and some places have done that. Some places in the world have invested and are benefiting from that now. But the UK has got stuck not only on fossil fuels, but on fossil fuels for profit. Norway.
Yeah, but you're beginning to sound like you're beginning to sound like somebody from Extinction Rebellion, Ruth, when you're supposed to be representing poor people who can't afford to heat their homes. They don't care where their fuel comes from. They just want to stay warm, don't they?
I'm sorry, that's not what we found at all. People in this country usually think that climate change is an enormous worry, not only for ourselves, but for our children.
That's not true. Well, that isn't true, I'm afraid. Some people do, but not all of them.
No, not absolutely all, but a vast majority do. And it's
not a vast majority either. It's not a vast majority, Ruth, I promise you.
It's a slander to think that people who have less money are less concerned about the environment. People in the countryside.
Well, I speak to people every day that have ordinary jobs, who live ordinary lives, who are not in any way wealthy, and what they want is cheaper energy. They don't really care where it comes from, but they want to be able to afford it.
Yes, of course. Everybody wants to be able to afford it. I do, you do. Everybody we speak to wants to be able to afford to keep warm. That's why we want a system which has energy for all, so that the people who have least are not left out and forced to pay higher prices than richer people.
But if you keep making people pay for high prices for energy because you're obsessed with climate change, that's not going to help anyone.
That conversation could have sparked enough energy to fuel the country. And that's it for this edition of Clashes of the Week. From me, Phil Dave, thank you for the pleasure of your company. And make sure you stay tuned to the home of common sense. Of course, this is Talk Radio TV.